I love this series that we're walking through. So we're in week 3, for those of you guys who maybe haven't been here. Week 3 of a series called What is Worship? And I love, this is one of my favorite things that Sarah Martin, she designs a lot of the stuff for the church. And she designed this for us, she actually drew it herself. And it's one of my favorite posters, graphics that we've had. And I'll explain why in a little bit, because we'll get to the story that it's based around. But I love this series because I'm a worship leader, I'm a worshiper. I connect well with the Lord in times when we're together communally, whether we're singing songs or we're praying or doing whatever. So I'm really excited to dive a little more deeply. Tonight I want to try to be as practical as possible, but also explain what worship is all about. So those are kind of the goals. But in order to do that, I need to introduce to you a person from my life who I guess I would call a friend. Have you ever had a relationship where you're kind of friends with this person, but you're also kind of at odds with this person, and a friend of me, I guess, but I'm nervous to say that they're my enemy, because that sounds really dramatic. So, not sure if it's friend of me or just I'm friends with you, but I also don't trust you completely. So, this person, who doesn't know I'm talking about him, his name's Christopher Dean. That's him on that side. That's me as a baby, pretty much. So maybe you don't even recognize that as me, but that's me. And this is Christopher Dean. It's spelled with a K. A little pretentious, and Christopher Dean was a little pretentious, but he was a good dude. One of my really close friends in 5th and 6th grade. I went to church with him, and we did a lot of stuff together. And then as we grew up, we just kind of developed different interests. He was really smart, and he kind of liked to let you know that he knew that, and was really into theater. And sometimes theater people are a little bizarre. And I did theater as well, so I have my own level of bizarre, it's there. But his was a different level of bizarre. So Christopher Dean, we went to this thing called NYC. Didn't stand for New York City, don't know why. But it was a thing called Nazarene Youth Conference. It was through our denomination. So some of you guys went to the Brethren in Christ thing that used to exist, Youth Quest. Okay, some of you guys have heard of that maybe. It was kind of like that, where all the Nazarenes, that's a denomination, from around the country would come together. There were 10,000 people, and we went down to St. Louis. And that's actually where this picture was taken, in St. Louis at this conference. And we were juniors at the time, and we had big worship sessions every time. They brought in a couple different bands. We were down on the floor for, what's that band with the Hulk fists? Yeah, I was whoa, I am old, okay. Family Force 5, which I thought were horrible, but there was all these bands that came in, and they led worship, and there's this big thing, big production, lots of music, so the worship session's really powerful. And I remember, the second day on, Christopher must have made some sort of choice to start exploring worship differently, because we would be I'd be a row behind him, and the song would be playing, and people would be worshiping, maybe some people have an arm raised, and Christopher Dean would be I'm not exaggerating, honestly. I wish I was in this moment. He was geeking out. It was I really did not know what was happening, because I knew him pretty well, and he wasn't a very expressive person in that way, in worship settings. And so I started asking the question, what is this dude doing? Because every worship session he would be just something so weird. And it started me on this journey of asking, okay, well, what is worship? Because is that what he's doing, is that worship? And I also was asking the question, what is not worship? Because I really wasn't sure what was happening in his body or brain when he was doing this stuff. And to this day, I don't know if Christopher, it was just really genuine, you know what, I don't care what anyone thinks of me, so I'm just gonna worship however I wanna worship. Or if he was doing it to be funny, or if he's just a little cuckoo, I don't really know. I didn't get answers on that, but he was going kind of all out. And so I've been asking myself the question for a long time now, for many years. Okay, what can worship look like? And what shouldn't it look like? Are there guidelines, are there rules on what we should or shouldn't be doing? So I want to go to a story in the scripture that kind of helps us answer these questions. And this story comes from Luke chapter 7. It's a story that maybe parts of it are going to sound familiar to you, because there are other stories in different gospels that have some similarities weaved in, but we're going to look at this specific story in Luke 7. So yeah, let's read it together. You don't have to read out loud, because that sounds scary when everyone does that at church, so I'll just read it. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, kind of weird, right? She's just standing there weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. Kind of weird. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, this is Jesus speaking, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You didn't give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time that I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little, loves little. Then Jesus said right to her, your sins are forgiven. Is that a familiar story to anyone? Let me see a hand if it is a familiar story. Okay, to some of us. So we have this woman, she's crying, she's wiping Jesus' feet. We have this alabaster jar of perfume that is broken. And in other Gospels, people aren't really sure if this is the exact same story or not, but in other Gospels, there's a woman who breaks a jar of perfume on Jesus' feet, and it's said that it's worth like an entire year's salary. Maybe some of you guys have heard that. And so we're not sure if this woman is the same woman as that or not, but this woman here, she lived a sinful life, whatever she was doing, and she comes to Jesus and has this moment with him. She's probably never met him before, and yet this crazy moment happens. And so I want to paint the picture a little bit better because most of us probably picture, throw up that first picture, the Last Supper. Okay, so a lot of us have seen this. It's detailing Jesus and the disciples at the Last Supper, and they're at this table and they're eating that way. And so we probably picture when people are eating in the scriptures that they're doing so this way. However, it was very common for people to actually lie back when they ate. Go to that next picture, Katie. If you look, this is actually some like ruins, okay? And look at just those slabs around, and then the centerpiece is actually where the table would be. And then go to the next picture. It would probably look something like this. It's called a triclinium, all right? And so people would actually lie like on their sides, or the people in the back are kind of on their stomachs, and all the food would be in the middle, and they would eat, which is really weird, right? Like, we don't really do this. I once had an idea to invent a restaurant where it was all couches instead of chairs, so that once you eat way too much, because that happens every time I eat, then you could like lay down for a while. And I still think that's a really good idea. Do not steal it, because I copyrighted it. But that's kind of like what's happening here. You get to lay down and have a snack at the same time. And so maybe they have something figured out for us. But I want you guys to kind of picture this scenario. So they're at a Pharisee's house who would have been decently well off, and Jesus is there. And this isn't a representation of this exact passage, but imagine this for a second. The woman would have been standing like back along the edge of those people's feet. Okay, so the woman comes into the home. She's standing, she's not allowed to be there. Okay, she wasn't even invited actually. So she's back behind, and something about being in the presence of Jesus moves this woman to tears. And so she begins crying and begins crying. And if she's standing back there, she's crying on Jesus' feet. And she's crying, and she's crying. And so she begins to take her hair, and she wipes his feet with her hair, and cleans them off, and washes his feet. And then she begins to take this oil from an alabaster jar and cleaning. And a really interesting thing, some scholars think that this woman may have been a prostitute, because it just says she lived a life of sin. And so back in that day, often prostitutes would wear like a vial of oil, and it would give off an aroma every once in a while. Kind of like a Glade plug-in. You know how they're like, okay? Like every once in a while, just when you need it, it's like, okay? But this one was for a prostitute. So it would give off an aroma, which like sadly enough was how people would know that what she was selling, which was herself. And that's how people, passers-by, would know what she was offering. And so some people think, and they say there's an alabaster jar, so there's a lot of different theories and stuff, but there's thoughts that like she could have broken that oil and and worship Jesus, even with the oil that she would have used to let people know she was a prostitute, symbolizing like, I'm moving away from this, like I'm giving this up, which is a really interesting interpretation. I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but I think I love that picture. When she gets in the presence of the Lord, she's crying, she's wiping with her hair, she's wiping the feet, she's breaking oil and all of these things, and just honoring God in that moment. And in that moment, she is giving a full body expression of worship. You know that expression like blood, sweat, and tears? I put my blood, sweat, and tears into that. All right, she's literally crying on Jesus. And using her hair as a rag, that's such a weird thing to do. I tried to look up, did like people do that in that day? I didn't really find anything. Like that's such an odd thing to do. She's using her hair because she doesn't have a rag, and then she's giving the oil. She's literally giving everything she has as a full body expression of worship. And I think the only reason that this woman is doing that, I don't think she goes around doing that to everybody, okay? She probably wouldn't get invited to many parties. I think she did that because she was in the presence of the true king, and she knew it. So the way that she worshiped looked differently because she was in the presence of God. And so that's kind of like the title of my message. If you're gonna go back to the theme slide, Katie, that's kind of why we have this picture here. Okay, so you have this woman's hair, and I love the image of the hair. For some reason, I just think that's powerful. And she's down there at his feet. And so tonight, I want to talk about like full body worship. So if she's giving everything she has, what does that mean for us? As we meet here, and Jesus' physical presence is not here, they're not lounging and eating grapes, like we're here worshiping God. What does it look like for us to give our full bodies and our hearts? And I think a lot of what it can look like is surrender, is focusing in on the moments when we are worshiping together. In our small groups, we're going to talk a little bit about like what are some powerful moments you've had during worship. Maybe you're someone who has like a lot that come to mind. Maybe you're someone that's like, I don't know that I've really had one. But let me tell you, as a worshiper, like worship is this space that is created for us to meet with God, for us to enter into the presence of Jesus. And when that happens, you know, maybe my arms are raised, or maybe I'm down on the ground on my knees, or maybe I'm praying, or maybe I'm crying, or maybe I'm just sitting still and thinking and listening. It can look a lot of different ways, but the point I'm trying to make is that we should be fully invested. Christopher Dean, if that was a genuine expression of worship, he was fully invested. That was like definition of full body worship, okay? Because he was flailing. But for us, is our whole heart involved? Is our whole mind involved? Our whole spirit and our whole body? Are we fully present in our moments of worship? And here's the important thing about it, because sometimes we can talk about this type of stuff, and then you can hear like, oh, well, if I don't raise my hands, then I guess I'm not worshiping fully. Or if I'm not jumping around like that dude jumps around, then I'm not doing it right. And that's not true, because full body worship has to be genuine in order to matter. Any type of worship, it has to be genuine in order to matter. So if you are worshiping so that someone near you thinks that you're a good singer, then that doesn't matter. You're missing the point. If you're worshiping or raising your hands because you're thinking, oh, I think I'm a leader in this youth group, and if I raise my hands, maybe someone else down the road will raise their hands. We're losing it already. Do you get me? Like, we need to be so locked in with Jesus that we are worshiping with everything we have only for him, so that every voice around us is silenced, and we can meet with the Father. We can be in the presence of the King. There's a passage that I shared back at the retreat before one of our worship sessions. It comes from Matthew 6, and verse 1 says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." And I love this chapter because it goes on to list 3 separate ways that we worship, and it tells us exactly what not to do and what to do. So let's go to that first example, okay? So this passage in Matthew says, "When you are giving to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the streets to be honored by others." But it says, "Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret." So essentially, like, people would go and they'd be like, "I just gave $5, brr, brr, brr," and like everybody would know that they gave $5 and you'd get a pat on the back. Similar to like, even some of the stuff on like GoFundMe or things that we do, like sometimes we like put our names out there because we're like, we don't want people to know that we gave money. Or like, I want people to know that I'm a good person and I gave to this mission trip. And it says like, don't let your left hand even know what your right hand is doing. The way that you give should be in secret. So here's an example. It's about having a genuine heart. Next, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites. They're slamming hypocrites in this chapter. Do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the streets to be seen by others. But instead, and this is the verse that we read at the retreat, if you remember. Instead, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. So instead of parading your prayers around in this public manner, like, I'm a good prayer because I know the right words to say, and I'm so eloquent, people tell me that I'm good at praying. Instead of all that, go into your room, shut the door, and just talk to your Father. Like, that's in the Bible. That's not me saying that. The Bible is telling us that. It's so crazy. Okay, last one. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others that they are fasting. But instead, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you're fasting. So we have all these different things when you're giving to the needy, or when you're praying, or when you're fasting, which to me are all acts of worship. And the Bible is clearly saying, like, when you go and do these things, don't announce to the world that you're doing them, but you should be doing them in secret, just for your Father, not for anybody else. And tonight I really want to challenge us to have that mentality when we meet together and do like musical worship. It's not about what anybody else in this room thinks of you. Doesn't matter if you are amazing at singing or you are the world's worst singer. Bless you. Bless both of you. Because it's just about what kind of heart you are offering God. So how does this look like practically in our lives? Because I want to actually talk about like what worship looks like for us. So on a normal Sunday night, when we come together and worship, the worship leader will usually say, all right, like stand up and spread out, right? So why do we spread out? To be more personal? What are some other ideas? Why do we spread out? Yep.
So that we can focus on just us and Jesus rather than noticing other people.
Cool. Any other ideas? Yeah.
So we have freedom to move.
You have freedom to move if you need to, yeah. Less distractions. Okay, yes. Okay, so you can kind of worship in private a little bit. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Jonathan. Yeah, so you have enough room? Cool. You guys can just preach the message because that's correct. I wrote down, like, it's about focus. So if I'm sitting next to my best friend, if something happens, I want to tell them. Because they're my best friend. They think the way that I think, you know? And so I want to talk to them. And so it's easier for me, like, if I find a little bit of space. One, I like to move a little bit. So that gives me, I'm not going to hit somebody. And I get distracted so easily. And I know that probably 90% of you guys would agree with that statement. Because your generation is a more distracted generation than mine. And so it's really hard to focus. And so if you can carve out some time and just focus just by yourself, that's why we go places. So it's not because you have to. It's not because everybody else is going places. Not because sitting down is way more comfortable. Like leaning up against the wall, that feels good. But that's not why we do it. Okay? We do it because I want you to find some space where you can focus on the Lord. Maybe that's exactly where you are in your seat. If that's where you focus the best, then don't move. You don't have to. It's just to provide us with focus. So here's another question then. Why do some people, when they are worshiping, raise their hands or like move around or like raise them here, raise them here, raise them here? I was going to read this article that's really funny that talks about all the different ways we raise our hands, but I didn't want to make it a laughing matter and it would. So why do we raise our hands? Why do people express themselves that way in worship? Some ideas. Yes?
Like when people do this, just to kind of like symbolize like they're letting Jesus come to them and kind of work there.
Cool, so like when your hands are out like this, okay? Yes?
For me, it's like whenever I'm showing God that I really mean it, and that's fulfilled.
So it's like an extra step in something that you're singing, you mean it a little more, and so you're like demonstrating, yeah, I really believe this, okay?
A lot of times for me, it's like in worship, and it's complete worship, and I'm not with any distractions. It just kind of happens without me.
Okay, and is that something that you do like in other parts of your life? Like if you were at a dance or something, would you move? Like, are you a mover?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so it's kind of natural in your body already to be someone who moves, okay?
I think for me it's kind of like a focus point. Like when I have my arm, I'm like, okay, all my energy's in this, I'm not thinking about other things.
Okay, so something else that even helps you focus even more. Okay, interesting. Surrendering, okay, good, yep.
Sometimes it helps me put my heart in the right place, that practice of
Okay, cool.
For me, it's like praising God.
Cool. Yeah, just say it. Say it. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Or receiving at this time.
Okay, about receiving. Cool, yes.
Sometimes it's an act of obedience because you are concerned about what people think of you, and so you're letting go of that and willing to do something that maybe you don't harmful, or maybe feel like it might look like you look silly, but you're just doing it because you need to, because God's more important than obedience to be.
Yeah, an act of obedience. Cool. Mhm.
I heard one time that, like, when we're little, we, like, raise our hands up to our parents because we want them to, like, hold us.
Mhm.
And so, like, when we do that to God, it's like, I need you, like, I want you to, like, hold me right now and love us.
Yes, cool. So we're all describing, essentially, nonverbal communication. That's all of us were saying that, whether it's surrender or hold me or I'm laying myself down or this is my focus point. Like, we're all talking about what it means to communicate or show something non-verbally. And we do that in like so many areas of our lives. Like if I'm like this, Alexa, what am I saying to you? Wrong. Just kidding, right? I'm saying hi. Yeah, like you can say so many different things. I can do a million different hand gestures, but we won't, all right? I can tell you, you know exactly what I'm trying to say. I don't need to say like, hi, hi, every time. She knows I'm saying hi when I do this, because that means just as much as me saying hi. This means the same thing. And there's the statistics that's floating around that says like 7% of your communication is verbal and the rest is nonverbal. It's not entirely true. So the truer statistic is that 55% of the way that we communicate is body language. 55%. Over half of how you communicate to anybody is body language. So if you didn't do the math in your head, that's more than your verbal communication. Like what you say means less than how you respond. And that's a big deal. And I think that's important for us to understand as we move into worship. Because like I love throwing my arms around. I love moving because I'm just naturally a mover. That's what I'm going to do in regular life. But I also communicate things through that. So every time I pray, I've been doing this for a couple years, I put my arms out like this every single time. And it means a couple things to me. The first is like, okay, God, as I pray, I also want to be receiving from you. This is how I receive something, right? So I want to be receiving from you, not just talking to you. I also use it as a means of surrender, because there are times that someone will be like, okay, let's pray for the meal. Dear Jesus. And I'm like, I'm really comfortable right now. Like, I don't really want to do that. And I'm like, okay, I need to surrender in this moment, and like, I need to just come here, and it focuses my mind on the reason that I am praying. Now, if I swing the pendulum all the way and I just become so legalistic that I'm like, I'm not praying if I don't do this, then that's bad too. Okay, but for me, I want to go to that place to show that prayer means something to me, to focus my mind. Now it's time to pray, and I actually really want to focus here. So it doesn't matter how you respond. Okay, it doesn't matter if you sit in your chair and that is how you worship, and you don't sing a single word, and you don't move your body at all. If it is genuine, if you are meeting with the Lord in that space, then that's okay. If you're somebody that like does like to move around or does, is kind of a mover, and you're sitting in your chair all the time because you're afraid that other people are going to think you're weird if you move around, then that's not really okay. Because it's about giving everything you have. So later tonight we're going to worship some, and I just want to push you to go to that space. Some of us need to kind of get out of our comfort zones a little bit and like move a little bit, or try raising our hands, or just like focusing more on Jesus. Some of us maybe need to take that back a notch because you've been doing it so that other people look at you and you look like you're really worshipful. There's a lot of different people in this room, so we're in different places. But I want us to come back when we worship later on this evening, and I want it just to be the most genuine outpouring of your heart, that we don't care what people think of us, and we just worship the Lord. So before we do that, we're gonna head into small groups, and I have just a couple questions. So it's not just like catch-up time. I want you guys just to go to small groups and talk about these things. I think leaders, I sent it to you guys already. Did I? Yeah, all right, yeah, hey, I'm looking at you, Pastor. Okay. So you guys have these questions. Students, this is what I want you guys to cover in your small group. And then we are gonna meet back here at 7:50. So you have 16 minutes. Okay? So go somewhere close enough. All right? You can stay in this room if that's easier. And then get back here 7:50. All right? And we'll